We are going to Nashville now. Our good and longtime friend Stu Grimson joins us on video. There he is, the Grim Reaper from his office. How you doing, Stu?
Hey, I'm fantastic, Rod. And how are you, my old and dear friend?
That's good.
I said good. In no particular order, my old and dear friend.
Grimmer, I got to say this. I got your show notes, interview notes, and I love the fact that you wanted to talk about being scouted to the Pats, and I'm going to ask you about that. God. But I was up in Delisle last month, and Theo Fleury was speaking. He did 20 minutes on Pat's Warrior stories. But I didn't think you could talk junior hockey stories and anybody would care. But he goes, I was the director of marketing for the Moose Jaw Warriors in the 80s because I would say something about that meathead Stu Grimson in the paper, and both arenas would be full on the weekend. Have you heard him say that before?
I have not. I really have not. But I'll tell you what, for that was one of the, of course, the geography, led to this rivalry right out of the gate. But the instant that the Moose Jaw Warriors became part of the WHL, and they were right down the freeway from the Regina Pats, my former WHL team. It was an instant rivalry. It was fantastic. Can I tell you real quick, Rod, one of my favorite stories? You may remember, and this is in my book, back in the 80s, Miller Lite, I think Miller Beer Company had this ad campaign where it was the big debate. They do it in several different ways in their ads. Tastes great, less filling. Tastes great, less filling. Well, the Moose Jaw fans got onto that, and they did a unique spin on it to mock me every time I came into their building. I kid you not. I'd be skating up the ice. I'd have the puck on my stick, and one side of the building is going Stu. The other side of the building is going Pid, Stu, Pid, Stu. I mean, there are so few moments in a hockey game where you're out there and you're playing, you're involved in the action, and you're actually laughing to yourself. The moment is just that funny. It was hilarious.
Well, and by the way, he went on to say that Pat's Warriors was no different than Battle of Alberta Flames Oilers, like in terms of intensity and all the rest, which we all know. But you did mention your how you got to the Pats. Would you mind telling that story before we move on to some NHL topics?
It's a really unique story. Growing up, my family and I, we lived in Kamloops, British Columbia. And I had a group of buddies. We played football, we played hockey, but it was kind of football season this particular time of year in the fall in Kamloops. And we're wearing our football jackets, Sahali High. That was the name of our school. And we're walking down Main Street, Kamloops, heading towards the movie theater. And back in the day in Kamloops, there was a lot of oil rig workers that used to come to town from out of town because they'd be working on the rigs, but they come to town and they'd come in to, whoop it up, blow off some steam and have a great time. And we called them rig pigs. They're walking down the street on the opposite side from us, and just happenstance, we end up on the same corner right there in front of the Kamloops movie theater about 6:30 in the evening. My buddies and I are going to catch a movie, but these guys start mouthing off. They're like 7, 8 years older than us. They start mouthing off. They go, Sahali sucks onions. Sahali sucks onions. Well, two of my buddies are standing talking to these guys. I parted their shoulders. I waded into the middle, and I just tattooed one of these guys, popped 2 teeth out of his face, and here we are, big brawl in front of the Kamloops movie theater. And as legend would have it, the head scout for the Regina Pats is driving by the movie theater that night. He sees Stu. I know that kid. I've seen him play.
Was it Glenn Dirk?
It was. I can't believe you said that. It was Glenn Dirk.
I know my dub lore. Continue. Sorry. Robert Dirk's dad.
You're amazing. You're amazing. Glenn Dirk is driving by. Stu Grimson, I know that kid. He's not a bad player. I ended up on the list. So back then we didn't have a WHL draft. It was a list. You got listed by your junior team. And as legend has it, 2 weeks from then, I ended up on the list of the Regina Pats, and the rest is history. I was 3 years a Regina Pat.
So Stu, an old high school buddy of mine sent me a text. He said, I'm seeing that you and Stu are on the show together Thursday. You have to ask him about the Brandon bench clearing brawl and the warm-ups from back in '83 when Ron Hextall took his stick and whacked, I think it was Alan Acton, and then you absolutely spontaneously combusted. What do you remember about that?
Oh, my gosh. What I remember was that real time slowed down to slow motion speed, and it got into that kind of longest yard like motion picture. It was just like, it was surreal. It was a surreal moment. But you're exactly right. It was a quirky kind of a night that sparked or an incident that kind of sparked the whole thing. Somehow the Zamboni was down, or there was a problem with the ice, and they had to close down one part of the period, and they tacked it on to, I think, the third period. So anyways, long story short, Ron Hextall ended up skating right through the middle of our circle of guys, leading out his Brandon Wheat Kings. And Hexy comes out, and he's got his stick, and he's kind of like, just wielding it over his head like this. And we all kind of came together at center ice. Hextall he brought his stick down right across the back of Alan Acton, and that just sparked. It was a powder keg. It was the flashpoint for this huge brawl that lasted, I think it was 45 minutes before they eventually cleaned up this absolute yard sale all over the ice. And so I remember a couple of things about that. One was, me and a bunch of other guys piling on top of Hexty. We're trying to get at Hextall. He's just, he's trying his best to get out of this because it's just turned into an absolute kook show. He eventually gets escorted into his player's box. We're trying to get at him in his player's box. One of the linesmen eventually escorted me off the ice, and here's where the real crazy part came for me. I'm in the penalty box. I'm the first player to be escorted there. And I'm sitting there kind of watching all this go on, just minding my own business in the penalty box while the refs are sorting out the rest. Brad Wells is a member of the Brandon Wheat Kings. He comes along the far side of the boards, outside of my, my vision, outside of my peripheral vision. And he comes through like the 9:30 bus, and he just clocked me, just suckered me right across the head. I'm like reeling back into the penalty box bench. Well, it's on again. I throw one leg over the boards. I pile out there. I'm back into the mix. It was just crazy. I didn't even have the strength to like throw a punch, but I ended up grabbing Brad Wells, and I'm pile driving him like against the boards. I'm grabbing the boards and I'm slamming his head against the boards.
Because he's tiny.
I mean, it was something right. It was right out of WrestleMania, except Regina, Saskatchewan. It was the craziest thing.
And for some reason, the WHL wants to get rid of that. I have no idea why they would want to clean that up.
That brawl continues to live in infamy even today. I think if you ran the right Google search, you might be able to pull it up on YouTube.
And Kevin Gallant is literally going wild while this thing is going on.
Who wouldn't?
Well,
who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Now,
here's the thing. When's the last time you saw a hockey brawl and the head coach of one team and the general manager of the other team are involved in a fight together? That's how crazy it got. Bob Strum and Les Jackson actually tangled as part of that brawl.
So good. Now, to NHL people, Joe,
not exactly marketing material for potential WHL pairs, right?
No, I know. That's why we got viewers all over all over the world, but continent to Stu. And Joe Lazito's watching in New York State. He says, I'd imagine 99%. Oh yeah, he's a fan of yours. You know him? He says, I'd imagine 99% of Stu's fights were him just doing his job. But was there any opponent he had a genuine dislike for?
That's a really interesting question. It's a simple, straightforward no. I don't think so. But it's a really good question because I think a lot of people kind of, they assume that. They assume that, there has to be a healthy level of hatred involved between these two players if they're going to kind of, strive to take each other's head off. I will say this. There was this one moment where, and this is actually in the book as well, Matthew Barnaby used to get under my skin from time to time. He and I are pretty good friends today, but I used to chase this kid around for a long, like he was kind of that antagonist, that kind of, run around artist. He kind of get things stirred up out there. I used to challenge Barney from time to time, and he eventually did fight me once. I think I was an LA King and he was a Pittsburgh Penguin, but, and that's the reason. That's probably the only time I ever came close to fighting somebody for personal reasons. Barney was just one of those guys that could get under your skin.
Kelly, go ahead.
Well, I remember talking to Jim McKenzie one time at a golf tournament, and he said that early in his career, especially in junior, like he literally had to take the switch, but he had to really work at it because it was hard for him to ramp himself up knowing that he's got to fight somebody. He had to manufacture that anger and that, and it's not always an easy thing to do. Like, did you ever have to manufacture it, or did it just come so easy for you that it almost the opposite?
Yeah, I think I was probably more in the Jimmy Mack camp, and Mack and I were together for a couple of years in Anaheim, so I know him well, and I've heard him talk about that plenty. But I'm probably more in that category. When you're, and to me it makes a lot of sense. Mack kind of played more than I did through most of his career. But for long stretches of hockey, I'm sitting there as a Chicago Blackhawk or a Detroit Red Wing, or pick a jersey. But for long stretches of hockey, I'm sitting there. I'm not playing a lot on the bench. But then, I was never really asked by a coach to get into a fight. To me, I was kind of hypersensitive to the situations that required or necessitated that I get involved into an altercation. But when I did recognize that the moment required that, it's kind of hard to manufacture the passion, the emotion, the adrenaline that's necessary to go out there and to do that effectively. If something happens out of the circumstances of a game, and an altercation kind of spills out as a natural consequence of that, that's I'm 100-0 in those circumstances. When you're fighting on pure adrenaline and sometimes rage, it's hard to tangle with an athlete who's that engaged. But that's not always the case, or that's not always the luxury, for, if I can describe it that way, for those of us that did that job.
Two last questions for you, Grimmer. One, you wanted to mention James Neal. So 4 goals the other night. The Oilers have their team on the way to the Stanley Cup final, the fans, and I hope they do. Your thoughts on James Neal? Obviously, you know him. He's been around. What do you think about him?
I followed him a lot when I was still full-time with the Predators. James was a part of the crew for 2 solid years. And, he's a very determined athlete. He's a great athlete. He has made the game, he's made himself a student of the game and goal scoring specifically. And I really like his game because he's got a lot of bite to it as well. But I know him to be a proud athlete. And I saw him sign in Calgary last year. Going into the season, I just thought that was going to be a terrific fit, and it ended up being the exact opposite of that. So I know that James kind of rededicated. Not that he was a guy that kind of took a summer off, but rededicated himself to his fitness, the work he does with Gary Roberts off the ice. And he came back just determined to make the best of the Edmonton situation. So I'm glad that to this point, and as analysts, as broadcasters, we couch everything we say in the in the context of, or with the qualification, small sample size this time of year. But it really looks to me like a hand in glove fit. What a world-class talent McDavid is, and these two seem to have great chemistry working together out there. So I'm glad for James Neal. I'm glad for the Edmonton Oilers. I think this could be an important part of, what it takes to kind of get to the next part. And gosh, good for Kenny Holland for kind of spotting that and, getting out of a situation, Lucic, that wasn't working very well, and introducing an element that may be the linchpin to, some incredible success for the Edmonton Oilers this year.
And lastly, is a 2-parter. You've got a book out, which will be a must for Christmas, and 2, you're going to be in this neck of the woods this fall. So can you talk about that?
I sure am. Yeah, book hits store shelves October 15th. That's next week. Available today on Amazon.com on a pre-order basis, but it'll be widely available up in Canada. You'll see my ugly mug all over the place before too long, I'm sure. And I will be through there. Let me take a quick peek at my calendar if I can, Rod, while we're talking. But I'm going to be in Regina.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in Regina the 14th. So we're doing a terrific fundraiser in Regina on the 14th. It's Mobile Crisis. It's kind of to benefit Mobile Crisis. And this is a unique kind of a mechanism or organization within firefighters and the police department back there in Regina. We'll be doing a fundraiser for that. I'll get a chance to talk a little bit about the book there on the 14th. And then I'll be at the Pats game on the 16th. I forget who the guys are playing that night, but it's Experience Regina night on the 16th. So I'll be there with Dan and Jay and that whole crew, and that's going to be a lot of fun as well. So really looking forward to kind of getting back to really essentially where it all began for me, back with the Pats organization back there in Regina, and a chance to talk about the book, because I'll tell you, the Pats and that part of Saskatchewan, it's a prominent part of how this whole Grim Reaper nonsense got started.
Well, Grimmer, you know we still love you out here. You feel it when you come home. So looking forward to that, and thanks for all your time this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Rod. Good to be with you guys.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.